to be great, be whole. We're going to start with something Bhante wrote sometime around his 25th birthday when he was living in Kalimpong. The Buddha taught us that if we want to see things as they really are, if we desire to act nobly and powerfully in the affairs of life, we must first learn to retire within ourselves and hear, or rather feel, the whisper vibrating through the silence there. We must be our own island of refuge, our own light. We should not look to any external refuge. We should be deaf to all the voices that thunder at us from without, so that we can listen to the voice within. Then only will we be able to see and tread the path that will lead us, one day, even to the heart's enlightenment. This is from a really great essay, actually, that's in Crossing the Stream, called The Voice Within. And this passage follows a bit where Bhante's been complaining about all the different things that come in and at us. Billboard advertising and newspaper advertisements. The voices thundering then were an awful lot quieter than they are now. Yeah, with the advent of television, internet, mobile phones. Hearing the voice within. And you've probably read this because Maitreya Bandhu included it in that little Sikha booklet about the individual, and he said he couldn't resist including it. He said it's a cry from a young heart urging us to listen to our voice within, our potential individuality. Yeah, it's our potential individuality. And this quote also starts us off with the Buddha, of course. Bhante echoing those words of the Buddha's at the end of his life to Ananda when he said, be a lamp, be an island unto yourself. Be an individual. Don't go for refuge to other people, don't go for refuge to the group. So what does this actually mean, and how are we going to practice it? So in this talk, I'm going to explore what does Bhante mean by these terms individual and true individual. What's been the felt sense of that for me in my practice, just a snapshot of a particular time. What are the characteristics of the individual that Bhante draws out? And very much the difference between the individual and the true individual and the individualist. How is this relevant to our modern individualist alienated world? Why does it matter? And how can we each become more of an individual? And along the way I will say some things about William Blake. Because for Bhante, William Blake was a great exemplar of individuality. And Bhante was inspired by him from his teens right through to the end of his life. Some of these last essays Bhante wrote, he's going back to Blake. And Bhante says Blake embodies some dharmic principles in our own culture. So that's very important. Before I plunge in, I did want to share an image which has been with me for many years, and it's an image of our order. And it speaks to me of the importance of individuality, the individuality of us as individual order members. And it's the image that eventually led to the 50 Years, 50 Voices project, which you can see on the Buddhist Centre online, where interviews with 50 different order members were all brought together on the 50th anniversary of the order. And the image is that we have the centrality of going for refuge in the centre. And then if you imagine a 360-degree circumference around that, and order members standing at all those degrees, or more, but all the way around that 360 degrees, we're all approaching the centrality of going for refuge. But we're all doing it from our own particular angle, with our own particular conditioning, in our own particular way. And some of us are doing it in ways that seem diametrically opposed to each other. And that fascinates me. And I think if you can, what we were aiming to do with the project was to bring some of those angles together, like lights shining into a centre, and to create a kind of hologram of what I call the messy lived reality of the order. The order's an organism. There's a sort of ideal of what it might be like and an image, but actually it's constantly evolving and being co-created by all these different... When somebody joins the order, it evolves further. It's not fitting into something that already exists. That's really important. Yeah. And one other thing to add on that, I think, each time we encounter somebody who's going for refuge so differently to us that we're puzzled by it or even irritated, well, that becomes an opportunity for us to enlarge and deepen our understanding of this mysterious vital act of going for refuge and our mysterious vital order. Okay, so these terms, individual and true individual. As you probably know, Bhante, when he introduced this, made reference to the work of Karl Jaspers, who was an early 20th century psychiatrist and philosopher. And he's credited with coming up with this idea of the axial age in history. And broadly speaking, the idea is it's naming a period from about 800 to 200 BCE, when individuals began to emerge from this sort of undifferentiated mass of group consciousness. And before that period, we know the names of no individuals. From that period, we have Homer, Confucius, Lao Tse, Mahavira, Zoroaster, the Buddha, Plato, Aristotle, many, many more individuals who remain household names. And I was struck, Bhante says, they have given us the fundamental categories within which we still think today. Mm-hmm. We might not be aware of it, but actually, yeah, they've emerged. And it was the inspiration of this that led Bhante to begin to use the term individual, and in particular, true individual. And the term true individual, particularly, Bhante uses to help us really understand this Pali Sanskrit word Arya, which the Buddha and the Buddhist tradition use a lot when talking about Sangha. And the traditional translation of Arya is noble, as distinct from ignoble, as in the Arya Pariyasana, the noble quest. The Arya Sangha is the Sangha which is made up of those with insight, those whose practice has become irreversible. So stream entrants, once returners, non-returners, arhants. That is what is meant by the Sangha as a refuge. Us lot, we're also Sangha, and we can support and help each other, but we're a lot less reliable than the noble beings of the Arya Sangha. And because their insight is irreversible, we can trust that, we can treat them as a true refuge. And we're work in progress. We're all work in progress towards becoming true individuals. And we're each differently conditioned by our karma, and we've all got different things to work on in order to become true individuals. And that's, by true individual, is what Bhante would describe as real going for refuge. So ordination, we're integrated enough to be effectively going for refuge. When our going for refuge becomes real, that's when we become a true individual. Yeah. And we do chant about the true individuals. We did this morning, in the Tiratanaloka, the Atta Purisa, the 8 persons. It's a slightly cryptic way of referring to the 4 levels of the Aryans and the different aspects. Ask one of us if you want to know more about that. I won't go into that. The main point is true individuality is connected with irreversible insight, with vision, with seeing things as they really are, which means recognising the defects of samsara, the marks of conditioned existence, and knowing that there's a spiral path we can tread, which leads from suffering to insight, freedom from suffering. And to tread this spiral path is to go forth from the group, to go for refuge. And it's something we can only do as an individual act. So in the short puja, we say, as one by one we make our own commitment. One has to be individual enough to make the commitment to the spiral path. So that's the individual stepping onto the path that leads to being a true individual. One is no longer a statistical individual. Yeah, we're not just one of a number fitting ourselves in to a group. We've stepped out of the group. For some of us, that can be a literal going forth, a physical leaving of various conditions, and I'll say something about that in a minute. For others, it can mean going forth from identifying with the group while still remaining, for example, living in the midst of our family or carrying on in the same job. What this means is that we're no longer seeing that group as a refuge and as something to fit ourselves into. We can remain in it, but not of it. I think that phrase is really useful. In it, but not of it. Yeah. We recognise the limitations of the groups that we're in, but we also know that we need something bigger, a bigger vision, a vision of a true refuge, which we can place at the centre of our mandala. That mandala can then include whatever we consciously choose to include in it, but it's not the membership of the group that's defining us, it's not that that's at the centre of the mandala. We're not making that a central organising principle of our lives. So this first step as an individual means our vision is no longer limited just to the cyclic round of life belonging to a group. Bhante describes the gravitational pull of the group. Actually, as I was thinking about that, it's a bit like a plug hole, isn't it? Like you go round and round. And when we begin to recognise this gravitational pull, and we step away from it, that's us stepping into being an individual. You could say we step onto the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path. And in order to do this, we each need our own individual glimpse of what Bhante describes as perfect vision, that first step of the Eightfold Path. Now, that might not be visual at all. This language of visual and visualisation, you can get tripped up by it, and that will be a shame, because that isn't what Bhante means. You don't have to be visual. It might be an intuition, it might be a felt sense. There's a knowing, yeah? There's a knowing of something, a recognition of something beyond the mundane. And we all need some connection with the true refuges in whatever way, however it arises for us. There's a heart wish to move towards this, and that's what sets us out on the path. And again, Bhante encourages us to really cherish and keep faith with that glimpse of vision. Yeah. It's the end of our golden string, he says in various places, which if we continue to follow it as individuals, alongside others in the Sangha, each following their own individual thread, like that image I described at the path, it will lead us closer to the true refuges. And we have to take care not to be waylaid by others who haven't found the end of their own golden string yet. Yeah? They might want us to keep playing our habitual role in the same old way, in whatever group we find ourselves in. I remember having a conversation with my niece a few years ago. We were very close and I love her dearly, and there was a big family gathering that I really wasn't keen on going to. She said, "Oh, but I just like seeing you there on your perch." So this area is all, in fact, the area of the first fetter of fixed self-view. Yeah, that one of the first of those fetters that hold us back from being a true individual. If we're staying in the shape and the role that we feel we need to have to fit into the group, we're attached to a particular version of ourselves, a particular identity. It's going to hold us back from liberation. So staying true to one's own vision or heart wish, to our connections with the three jewels, as I say, Bhante emphasises this again and again, particularly in those talks on the Eightfold Path. And this was a quality that he particularly appreciated about William Blake. So Blake lived in the 18th century. He was a poet, a painter and a prophet. And his verse on the golden string is famous, you've probably heard it. I give you the end of a golden string, only wind it into a ball, it will lead you in at heaven's gate, built in Jerusalem's wall. So it's important to say that Blake took Christian imagery and repurposed it to his own ends. Yeah. So for Blake, Jerusalem is actually a feminine archetype of the city of the imagination. There's loads you could say about it. You can see it as an image of where we want to head. So Bhante wrote an essay on Blake, and he says, Blake was quite aware that he was original, but he did not seek to be original. He was original because he was true to his own experience and his own spiritual vision. So as I say, Blake was living and working in the 18th century, and he was there at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, and also in the so-called Age of Reason, or Rational Enlightenment. And what was interesting about Blake was that his own vision was vast, and it ran absolutely counter to all of that. He had a much bigger spiritual vision, which encompassed far more than dry reason and the material world. And he intuitively recognised the dangers that lay ahead with this increasing industrialisation and mechanisation. And I think it's fascinating for us now, because we're living in the aftermath of that age, in a way, in an increasingly alienated society, facing the consequences of the environmental degradation that's been brought by the industrial age. And Blake was there at the start going, hang on a minute. So Blake had an evolving vision of liberty, of forgiveness, and of love, and of all the energies of individuals being integrated. He had this vision, which in the language of the times he described as the fourfold man, we would say the fourfold person. Reason has its place, but so too, where are we? Reason. Oh, I haven't written the word reason. Okay. Reason has its place. So too does emotion. So too does sensing, intuition. So too does imagination. These different facets of ourselves, they've all got a place. And Bhante writes, about Blake's vision being contrary to the dominant thinkers. Blake particularly had it in for Bacon, Newton and Locke. They sort of symbolised, he caricatured them, they symbolised all that was bad about the 18th century. And whose mechanistic science, mechanistic natural philosophy and mechanistic psychology left no room for imagination or spiritual values. And Bhante says, in setting himself in opposition to them, Blake was a David against 3 Goliaths. He set himself against the master current of the age, and in this lies the true measure of his greatness. And Bhante goes on that being so much of an individual himself, it was only natural that Blake should uphold the importance of the general principle of individuality. He regarded it as the indispensable basis of true morality and true religion. For him, the individual was sacred and inviolable. And he believed it was the duty of each human being to be themselves and develop their own potentialities to the utmost, and to encourage others to do likewise. It's very, very much in the territory that we're looking at. So I thought I'd just pause here and say a little bit about my own experience of stepping onto the path as an individual. A sort of snapshot. And obviously it's very much work in progress that continues. So I came to the Dharma just over 30 years ago. Really, the rocket fuel behind that, if you like, was some very painful, unresolved issues from within the group of my family, from my childhood. And after some time I started therapy. And I got this sense, it's helping, but it's all looking back. There's not a vision, there's not something to move towards. I could feel the lack of a bigger vision. And came home from work one day, took off my suit, which I used to wear in those days, and found myself sitting cross-legged on the floor. And I was like, almost like looking down at myself going, what are you doing? Is it yoga? Is it meditation? And it was like, I think it was a somatic, I decided it was an intuition that I needed to learn to meditate. So I happened to have a work meeting near the LBC, so I popped in, bought 2 cassettes, it was that long ago, Mindfulness of Breathing, Metta Bhavana, but also there's this leaflet of Dharmarati's. Dharmarati had done about the winter retreat, the 1993 10-day winter retreat over Christmas, over New Year. And I was like, oh, that's what I need to do. Bit tricky in terms of my partner and my family, and they weren't delighted. So the compromise was I went for 5 of the 10 days, but I went. And I do really feel it was one of my first acts as an individual, to step out and step into those conditions. And I had such a hugely different experience of myself in the context of the Sangha on that retreat. I felt more able to breathe. I'd felt in a spin dryer of my emotions. So it's interesting when I learnt about the Wheel of Life. And on the retreat, it was like, oh, something stopped. And that retreat has set the course of what's followed really the rest of my life. And it was a couple of years after that, I'd been trying to fit in how I was growing into the context I was in. And I reached this point where I was like, I think I've got to leave. And I did a solitary retreat, and I wrote quite a lot of poetry. And I had this very vivid image that stayed with me. A bit Alice in Wonderland, really. I felt like I'd gone outside of the house of my relationship and my relationship with my family, and I'd just grown too big to go back in. I just couldn't do it. So I did physically leave. And I had spells of time when I was stepped back from being in contact with my family. I mean, that's a long time ago, and a lot has evolved since then. And actually, I'm in a good relationship with my ex-partner, who's very happily in another relationship. And, and I have a workable, good relationship with my family. So, but I had to do that. I mean, interestingly, I had asthma for years and years, and gradually as I practiced, it lessened and lessened. And after I did the 3-month retreat at Sangharakshita, I actually didn't use an inhaler regularly again afterwards. You can make what you will of that, but it's a strong metaphor for me. Suffocation, not being able to breathe, not having enough space. Stuck in the group, yeah. Okay, so after that interlude, we'll get stuck into the fundamental characteristics of the individual, which Bhante draws out. I mean, you probably read this in the material, but it's good stuff. So Bhante says, fundamentally, an individual needs 3 things. Objectivity, clarity and intelligence in the broad sense. An awareness that actions have consequences and that one is responsible for the consequences of one's actions. And receptivity. Bhante says, without this, one cannot proceed further, you're stuck. Padmasambhava would say, without this, no means exist. And I was reflecting on this and I was thinking, these 3, you could relate them to the qualities of clarity, openness and sensitivity, which are qualities we come across in other patternings, if you like, in how we look at the Dharma. So I'm thinking, so the first one, clarity of purpose, and that's not just intellectual, conceptual clarity, but a sense of being wholly in relationship with perfect vision or a dharmic perspective. Having awareness from a Dharma-informed perspective. Clear thinking, like Bhante was saying last night in the video. And that awareness includes the heart as well as the head. It's all our energies gathering to orient us towards our truest heart wish. Bhante says, we should in all circumstances think clearly and feel sincerely. And we can understand it in terms of that quality of mindfulness, which is continuity of purpose. Yeah. So we're clear about what we're doing and why we're doing it all the time, or as much of the time as we can be, and where that's likely to lead us. And this second point, where he's talking about awareness that actions have consequences, I was thinking, we can understand that in terms of sensitivity and ethical sensitivity, yeah? We're aware of the effects on us and others of our actions, and we can take responsibility for the consequences of our actions. As we say when we recite those verses on the 4 reminders, the karma I create shapes the course of my life. And this is all laying the groundwork for receptivity or openness, in the sense of being receptive and open to inspiration, teachings, transformation. Open to the bodhicitta as a suprapersonal force that wants to work through us. We're not closed and holding on to old group ways of being and seeing. There's an openness to let ourselves change and let what wants to come through, come through. We're receptive to the teachings and we can test them in the fire of our own experiences as a goldsmith tests gold in the fire. Bhante so often quotes the Buddha on that. I think it's a brilliant image. That's part of taking responsibility as well, isn't it? Yeah. So these are the 3 fundamentals. goes on to give us a list of 9 points about the individual. So, listen out and see if there are any that really delight you, or if there are any that really irritate you. Because they'd be good ones to think about bringing to your group to explore more. So the first one is freedom from group conditioning, seeing beyond our own conditioning. So the types of group conditioning here, they include family, sexual relationship, work, nationality, culture, linguistic group, class or caste, gender, social system, religion. You could carry on, couldn't you? And it made me think of Bhante in Breaking Through into Buddhahood. He says this breaking through the barriers and obstacles of psychological conditioning means a sort of de-identification of ourselves, a sort of dissociation from that part of ourselves which is machinic. Spiritual people, we may say, will not think of themselves as being English or working class or middle class or any class. They won't think of themselves as townspeople if they live in a town, or as country folk if they live in the country. The spiritual person won't think of themselves as essentially being a doctor or a bus driver or a housewife, and therefore will not think or feel or act out of any such conditioning. He or she will act freely and spontaneously out of the depths of pure, clear awareness. And Bhante mentions travelling to different cultures, learning another language as ways to develop awareness of different perspectives. It's not till we put ourselves in different conditions that we realise how many other ways of seeing things and being. Okay, number 2, developing self-consciousness, being aware of what you're doing and why. So it's not self-consciousness in that embarrassed teenager kind of way, it's self-reflexive consciousness. And this is where Bhante talks about those 4 dimensions of awareness that he talks about in the Eightfold Path. Awareness of self, body, emotions, thoughts, conditioning, motivation. And he says, awareness of your own uniqueness. I thought this was lovely. He invites us to bear in mind that universal consciousness has focused itself in you, and that, as one of an infinite number of foci, not a word I use every day, foci, as one of an infinite number of these foci, of that consciousness, you are irreplaceable and unrepeatable. Individual, unique. That's the first one, awareness of self. Awareness of nature, awareness of other people, nature and quality of your relationships. And fourthly, awareness of reality. And he says, we can go so far as to say, somewhat poetically perhaps, that the individual is one through whom the deeper reality of things, the truth behind appearances, functions or is present in the world. Through the individual is seen the universal. In fact, the individual and universal coincide. And this reminded me of the sense I had when we did the last Blake retreat. In May, I did a talk on Bhante, Blake and vision. And there was this sense of, if we can unfold these different aspects, I mean, there's more than 4, but the 4-fold model is very helpful. The more we can unfold of ourselves, it's like we can become this mirror that can reflect reality in an unmediated way into the world. We become more ourselves, and we become more able to benefit the world by reflecting reality into it. Well, Indra's net, we become a unique jewel in Indra's net. So, number 3, the individual is not submerged in the group. So you're not going out of your way to be different or eccentric. That would be individualism. You're yourself, says Bhante. You differ from others simply by being yourself. And this was the point he was making earlier when he was talking about Blake, that he was aware that he was original, but he didn't seek to be original. He was original because he was true to his own experience and his own spiritual vision. So one's point of reference is not the group. One's no longer defined in relation to the group. And so Bhante says each individual constitutes a distinct species, and they differ from the multitude in every thought and action. because those thoughts and actions are coming from an entirely different basis. Which leads us to number 4. You're not psychologically dependent on others. So you're not relying on the group for your peace of mind. You're willing and able to go it alone. And Bhante says, with this freedom and self-determination goes creativity. And that word, I don't know about you, but when I hear that word creativity, it makes me think of that fantastic lecture of Bhante's on mind, reactive and creative. If you don't know it, it's on video, it's recorded, you can read it. It's absolutely brilliant. And he says in that, the creative mind does not react. It is not dependent on or determined by the stimuli with which it comes into contact. On the contrary, it's active on its own account, functioning spontaneously out of the depths of its own intrinsic nature. The optimism of the creative mind persists despite unpleasant stimuli, despite conditions unfavourable for optimism, or even when there are no conditions for it at all. And then there's a really good bit, which you probably know. The creative mind loves where there is no reason to love, is happy where there is no reason for happiness, creates where there is no possibility of creativity, and in this way builds a heaven in hell's despair. So that last bit is Blake, builds a heaven in hell's despair. Blake actually wrote a song about that. Yeah. Or to put it another way, in that Sikha booklet, I love this bit, I'd never read it before. Bhante says, the choice is in our own hands, to wither and shrivel, i.e. react, or to grow and flourish, i.e. to create or blossom. And he says, to rot or blossom, it's up to us. Rot or blossom, isn't it great? It's so, I don't know, it's really kind of about that. Yeah. Okay, number 5. An individual is prepared to be unpopular. So the willingness to go it alone can and does lead to unpopularity. But the individual can bear it because they're not going for refuge to being popular with the group. They're not going for refuge to praise. They're not bothered about blame. It's worth reflecting on unpopularity in terms of those worldly winds of praise and blame. And if we're navigating by the true refuges, we can see them for what they are. They're distractions. And we can travel beyond them. And this is another characteristic that Bhante draws out about Blake. He says, much as his independence and originality contributed to the ultimate greatness of his achievement, they tended to isolate him from his contemporaries. Some people thought he was mad. Blake had a lot of difficulty in selling his work during his lifetime, and he had to make ends meet as a jobbing engraver, engraving other people's work. And he died poor. He was happy, he was singing apparently, but he was unknown really in any real sense. And yet these days he's recognised as a genius ahead of his time, and he's influenced so many artists, poets, musicians, thinkers, and huge exhibitions of his work are held about every 10 years at the Tate. And in 2009, there's often quite big articles about him in newspapers as well these days. And in 2009, there was this article on the 200th anniversary of this exhibition that Blake did put on himself. And it says, in May 2009, Blake opened a small exhibition of his work on the first floor of his brother's sock shop in Golden Square in Soho. Very few people came. It's not clear if anything was sold, but Blake kept the show up for more than a year, indicating a reluctance to accept defeat. There was one utterly contemptuous review, and this year it's the 200th anniversary of an unmitigated failure. Yeah, and this article also says this exhibition pushed him into a withdrawn state in his later years and set him on the way to almost a century of oblivion. That's true, but look where we are now. You know, in those last 18 years of his life, he produced the most extraordinary work. And if he'd avoided the unpopularity, if he hadn't stuck with it, we wouldn't have any of that. It took almost 100 years for the world to catch up with him, and we still are really. Yeah. So, number 6. An individual will develop emotions that are positive and refined. So we're in the territory of moving from the reactive to the creative, from being driven by greed, aversion and delusion towards generosity, love and wisdom. And in particular, Bhante emphasises that an individual takes full responsibility for their own mental states, recognising that our emotional experience is self-created. Radically renouncing blame is another way to put it. There's a very good talk on that on Free Buddhist Audio. Not only do we not react to others blaming us, we don't blame others for our own suffering. We recognise and practice on the basis that we can take responsibility for transforming our own mental states. And we don't waste time by blaming ourselves either. No blame. Just conditionality. It also means renouncing the power mode. And Bhante reminds us that the power mode is usually there in gross or subtle ways in the group, in group culture. It's gently or not so gently pressurising us towards conformity. And by cultivating metta, we're working to free ourselves and others from that pressure. And we do that also by cultivating, recognising and cultivating when we have a faith response. It's all helping us develop more positive emotion. We do that and we get to number 7. Energies flowing freely and spontaneously, cleanly and harmoniously. So as our emotions grow more refined, blockages, inhibitions and hang-ups are freed. And more energy is available for a creative response to whatever situation we find ourselves in. Blake says, energy is eternal delight. And in the 1970s, late 1970s, partly when Blake was very much in the currency around the LBC, there was a lot happening. It was in the middle of that time that Bhante wrote those 5 tantric precepts. He recast the 5 precepts in terms of energy. So not obstructing energy, not draining energy, not misusing energy, not having inappropriate energy, and not having clouded energy. Obstructed, drained, misused, inappropriate, or clouded. You can find them in volume 26 of the Complete Works. 5. Okay, number 8. You are alone. You're alone in being an individual amongst people who aren't individuals. To create, we generally need to be alone, at least to some extent. And to know ourselves, we do need time alone, and that's why solitary retreats are so important. And Bhante says, the greater your experience is, the harder it is for you to share it with others, like the Buddha. And I have a vivid memory of this myself. I had a very strong retreat at Rivendell in the middle of 1995, I think it was. And it was on that retreat... no, I can't tell you anything about it, it's not too much about it, there's not time, but basically a bunch of things happened and I had this vision of what the order really was in relation to what I really wanted to do with my life, individually and in terms of saving the world, and it was like, okay, that's it, I'm going to join the order. There was nothing I'd wanted to do or be that I felt I couldn't do or be better than as part of the order. It's like, yeah, and I came home, went to our caravan in Devon with my partner. I thought, I'm going to explain it to him. You can imagine. I can still remember sitting on the seat in that caravan with that kind of, no, I'm on my own with this. He's just not going to get it. And and it was some months after that, I decided, no, actually, I'm not giving up on this. I'm following this golden thread. Yeah. Okay, number 9. We've got to number 9. An individual encourages others to be individuals in their own way. Bhante describes this as being willing to take responsibility in any situation you're in to help make it a creative situation for oneself and others. Yeah? Taking responsibility to turn something into a creative situation. And I was thinking this points us to the love that comes from the discriminating wisdom of Amitabha, seeing and appreciating everyone in their unique and sometimes infuriating particularity. And like the parable of the plants in the White Lotus Sutra, we're doing whatever we can to enable ourselves and others to receive the rain of the Dharma and to blossom into whatever flower, plant, bush or tree that we truly are. And Bhante says this is the basis upon which individuals create spiritual community. This is the basis on which individuals create spiritual communities. So, just a quick recap on those 9. Freedom from group conditioning, self-reflexive awareness, not submerged in the group, not psychologically dependent on others, prepared to be unpopular, developing emotions that are positive and refined, having freely flowing, unobstructed energies, being alone, and encouraging others to be individuals. Okay. A brief reminder on the difference between an individual and an individualist. The main point is that the individualist goes out of their way to be different from the group, to stand out from the herd. We could say that they're effectively in reaction to the group, reacting to the group. They're still defining themselves in relation to the group by consciously seeking to be whatever's happening there. The individual, on the other hand, is simply themselves. They're following their own vision or inspiration. It doesn't occur to them to desire to be different to others. They're not reacting. They're just creatively following where this golden thread of their own inspiration leads. The group becomes irrelevant, at least on one level. It's not a focus of attention and concern. Yes, as we've already heard, Bhante says, we may even say that each individual constitutes a distinct species. It's mysterious is that, but interesting. So why is this teaching relevant to our modern, individualist, alienated world? Why does it matter to be an individual? It matters because if we're not seeking consciously to free ourselves from being a cog in the machine of samsara, we're contributing to the causes and conditions for suffering to arise for ourselves and others.
Can you read that again?
If we're not seeking consciously to free ourselves from being a cog in the machine of samsara, we are contributing to the causes and conditions for suffering to arise in ourselves and others. And Blake saw this very clearly. He was working, as I say, at the dawn of the modern age, industrialisation, over-rationalisation. He could see and feel the alienation, regimentation and exploitation beginning even then, and the suffering he brought. And he sang about this in his poem, London. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe, in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every man, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's cry runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. Ooh. So he wrote that around 1790, when the society, group culture, was embracing child labour, chimney sweepers. Britain was or had recently been engaged in loads of wars, America, Europe, India, soldiers, hence the soldiers. And there was this huge culture of hypocrisy about prostitution, including child prostitution, venereal disease, the harlots, the plagues. But he saw all of that and the cogs, if you like, that were contributing to that arising. So to say more about why individuality is important to our modern world, I need to say a bit about imagination, the role of imagination in the true sense in our lives, how it's become devalued and misunderstood, and what a powerful tool of the group imagination is. Yeah. And one key to developing as an individual is the recognition and cultivation of this faculty. Bhante talks about the imaginal faculty, or imagination. In our culture, it's undervalued, dismissed, ignored. We say just imagination, only a dream. And the entire advertising industry is powered by it. And not only that, you think about what happens in social media and the role of imagination in that. And it's something which Bhante and Blake emphasised again and again as being indispensable to our becoming balanced, whole, free human beings. So, in Reimagining the Buddha, where Subhuti is Bhante. Subhuti's talked to Bhante, and then he's written what Bhante said in Reimagining the Buddha. So it's Bhante speaking, really. The goal must be embodied in our imaginations. Our deepest energies gathered in an image of what we're trying to move towards. Yeah, really, imagination helps us to harness our energies. And in Wisdom Beyond Words, Bhante says, for Blake, imagination is not a faculty, but the operation of the whole man or woman, with reason and emotion fully integrated. And Bhante and Blake see the role of imagination in the true sense, enabling all those other faculties to become unified. So, again, I haven't written the words reason. Reason, emotion, sensing, and imagination. Gathering all those different aspects of ourselves, developing them if they're not developed, and having them available so that we can become... It's a bit like being four square, having all these aspects of ourselves strongly developed. And there is this resonance with the Buddha's emphasis on developing and equalising the 5 spiritual faculties. Got no time to go into that now. Yeah. What I want to say is, if the importance of imagination is not recognised and acknowledged, and we don't engage with it creatively, well, imagination is alive and well and operating in us and on us. And it's likely to be doing so reactively rather than creatively. So there's this popular saying, isn't there, familiar saying, it captured my imagination. Ooh, it captured my imagination. Sounds quite harmless, doesn't it? Story, an image, an idea. But let's just follow that metaphor. Because sometimes I think our imagination isn't just captured, it's held hostage. It's held hostage by powerful group ideas, ideals and ideologies. Capitalism, corporate society itself is powered by the myth of consumerism, and that holds so many of us hostages and traps people in debt and in poverty. And in a way, that's the least of it. Racism, xenophobia, fear of other, fear of what is not familiar. Not to mention, as I say, political, religious ideologies. Powerful and destructive products is the reactive imagination of the group, which is self-reinforcing. It's interesting, doing the Blake retreats, got to know Arivachin, who comes from Venezuela, and he was telling us in Latin America there's actually a word for political imagination. Imaginario politico. It's interesting, though, because I think it suggests that there's a recognition there of the significance of imagination in the way that there isn't in UK, US culture. Anyway, so if we're not practicing mindfulness or awareness, including awareness of the fact that we're much of the time driven by reactive imagination, I mean, you could say it's prapancha, isn't it? That's another way of describing it. Craving, prapancha, aversion, prapancha. We will be ongoingly conditioned by these forces of division and destruction. And if we ignore it, we allow our energies, our lives, to be sucked into being in the service of those forces. We allow ourselves to be a contributory factor, as I said before, in the suffering of samsara. But as we develop and strengthen our imaginal faculty in connection with our glimpse of vision, with our, with the true refuges, it can enable us to be more in touch with the reality that is beyond that kind of ego clinging, beyond the cyclical, beyond samsara. It's like we're navigating by a different star. And that can support us and inspire us and enable us to bring a creative response into the world, even if we're doing it alone in a particular context. So I've started talking already about the ways in which we can become more of an individual. Imagination, it's a big topic. That's why it has its own retreat, isn't it, the mythic context. So I won't say more other than, if you haven't read Reimagining the Buddha, do read it. And if you have read it, reread it. It's really, there's so much in there, in this area. And there's a really interesting connection, which I haven't got time to go into now. Divan's done some interesting work looking at Pingir's praises, where Pingir is talking about how he's always with the Buddha. And the word that's used there is sati, which obviously is usually translated as mindfulness or awareness, but it's doing the work of the word imagination, for which there isn't a word for imagination in the Pali Canon, in Pali and Sanskrit. And yet it was very much alive and well and functioning within the Buddha and all his. It was like an unconscious competence that they just knew that we are losing, we could lose. So mindfulness is the next one. You know, going back to that quote right at the start, when the Buddha exhorted Ananda, be a lamp, be an island, in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, he goes on to say, the Buddha, and how does a monk live as an island unto himself, with no other refuge? Here, Ananda, a monk, abides, contemplating the body as body. Likewise, feelings, mind, and mind objects. So she's referring them to the four Satipatthanas, the four foundations of mindfulness. It's mindfulness or awareness that's the key to becoming more of an individual. In extricating ourselves from being a statistical individual, a cog in the machine, it enables us to become aware of what our actual experience is and develop that self-reflexive awareness. Another point I wanted to mention is something Bhante encouraged us to do again and again, which is to reflect on praticca samuppada, reflect on conditionality in our own experience. Yeah? So we can extend our practice of mindfulness and become aware of the effect on our bodies, our feelings, our mind, thoughts of different situations. What's our actual experience if we're in a situation with a strong group culture? What's the consequence of that? What is the experience and the consequence of being alone? What is the experience and the consequence of being in those conditions alongside other aspiring individuals in the Sangha? Do we experience a sense of contraction or expansion? Are our energies more constricted or freer? Do we have a sense of our emotions being more or less positive? Mindfulness of the effect of being in different conditions is a very significant part of making our practice effective. We know what conditions we need to be in to support us to make our going for refuge effective. And Bhante says, one who goes effectively for refuge is, ipso facto, which means by that fact itself, an individual. Yeah? It's a definition, going for refuge. One is an individual. So in fact, everything we're doing in our ordination training is helping us to become more of an individual. I particularly wanted to mention briefly the system of practice, because Bhante's given this, and it's inspired. It's so brilliant because it gives us these principles that we can engage in collectively, but each in our own individual way, attending to what we need to in order to develop integration, positive emotion, to let go into spiritual death, to allow spiritual rebirth to happen and to cultivate receptivity. It gives us individuality in the collective of our spiritual community. There's some very interesting correlations between the system of practice and the spiritual faculties and these things I've been talking about. That would be in a whole other talk for another day. Briefly, something about Bhante's own integration as an individual. Bhante tells us in Moseley Miscellany, the Book of Blakes he was most inspired by when he was in his teens was the marriage of heaven and hell. And I used to go and see him when he was at Adishtan and talk to him about Blake sometimes. And once I asked him, what was it about that book that fascinated you? And he said, it was the title. And when I came across what Naga Bodhi wrote about Bhante, it kind of made more sense of that, because at the end of that book, The Boy, the Monk, the Man, Naga Bodhi says, it was always obvious that Sangharakshita was a complex man who didn't play by the usual rules. One evening in 1978, just after we'd opened the London Buddhist Centre, he shared a reflection with a few of us. He said, the forces at work in my personality when I was young were so powerful, so complex, so self-contradictory, that had I not discovered something as worthy of my commitment and devotion as the three jewels, I honestly believe they would have ripped me apart. I would have gone mad. So it's interesting, isn't it? That big enough vision of the three jewels was what enabled Bhante to become an individual. And it also made sense of why he responded so much to Blake, another character who had this huge vision and all these huge energies. Yeah. So I'm just going to end with a poem, which it just expresses something for me about us becoming individuals. To be great, be whole. Do not exaggerate or leave out any part of you. Be complete in each thing. Put all you are into the least of your acts, just as in each lake, with its lofty life, the whole moon shines. So this poem by the Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa speaks to me of individuality, of integration, love, energy and wholeness, and also of the bodhicitta, the moon of the bodhicitta that can reflect the light of the Buddha's sun. And the more of that moon that is available unhidden, the more light it can shine into the world. And so we can be like that. Each time we unfold a bit more of ourselves, each time we transform a poison into a wisdom, we're making a little bit more of ourselves available to shine the light of the bodhicitta into this suffering world.